Da, 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 da. Telling the truth is a bad idea.
None of it makes sense. None of it.
Where they're using false diagnoses.
You sure you want to do this?
And then misrepresented sexes in order to bill insurance companies to conceal, quote unquote, gender affirming care.
You know what history does to trained physicians who ignore science.
Oh, wow. I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder at 8 and prescribed Prozac.
What if you had to tell someone the most important thing in the world, but you knew they'd never believe you?
Their families left in ruins.
Bleeding with pain and soaking with pain.
Telling the truth can be dangerous business. Why? Why?
In June 2024, California Shasta County CPS seized our 15-year-old virgin daughter, not for abuse or neglect, but solely because we refused to affirm her sudden desire to transition.
Because that's what families do. Mom, they take care of each other.
What I mean by that is back in the 70s, lesbian mothers were in a position to lose their children just because they were lesbian.
Oh, is that brilliant? Telling the truth can be dangerous business. Honest and popular don't go hand in hand.
How much money we think each patient would bring in, and this is only including top surgery. This doesn't include any bottom surgery, and it's a lot of money. These surgeries make a lot of money. So females and male chest reconstruction can bring in $40,000.
And so my story is different from a lot of the others, the younger generation now, because I didn't do it because I wanted to be a man. I never medicalized except for testosterone, and the testosterone, the long-term usage of testosterone, was what caused me to have a hysterectomy and was a major contributor to those 5 heart attacks that you mentioned.
Truth.
When it settles onto the ground, when we have to actually make decisions about our own safety, or as a clinician, if I'm doing risk assessment and talking to people about institutional placement decisions, sex is a part of that picture. It has to be. And I don't think there are very many trans men who don't understand that.
Tell him the truth! You lied and cheated?
I was depressed, and I had also learned that I like girls and started identifying as LGBTQ in general. So that's what led me to online.
Dangerous!
I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
And then she goes on to say in her article, if this critical misunderstanding, which creates years of disability, medical, shopping, hopelessness, and failed interventions, is unfortunate, its extension into gender medicine is tragic.
You never know what someone might believe.
Telling the truth is a difficult problem. Telling the truth is a scary. Telling the truth is a scary predicament. Telling the truth is a bitter herb.
Forget herb. I never heard of a hit that had the word herb in it.
Telling the truth is.
Hey, y'all, welcome or welcome back, as the case may be. I'm Ellen Jimerson, and this is Moving Parts, a podcast where we talk about why children say they're trans. And it is so good to be back after my several weeks foray into European capitals, which was just wonderful. And had a great time, ate some great food, talked to some very interesting people, figured out the trains and the whole thing. And I do want to acknowledge that if you've been around a while, you will wonder what's happened to Johnny Skinner. And I'm sorry to tell you that he was working 3 jobs and was stretched pretty thin and just felt like he didn't have the energy or the time to do a good job on moving parts. And so I'm very sad that he's gone. He's just a wonderful young man, and very glad I had the opportunity to work with him for a couple of months. And so we have a spectacular guest for you. As I've said, and as you know, the focus of this podcast is a position against the medicalization of children who say they're trans. But that doesn't mean that we can't talk to people as we have from the beginning, including Erin Kimberly and Jesse Harris and others who did make the move to transition, and they had good reasons for it. We have another one tonight whose name is Zander Keig. Am I pronouncing your name right, Zander? Is it Keig or Keig? I'm not sure he can hear me right now. Oh, here we go. Here's chat. Keig. Zander Keig. Okay, sorry about that. I should have asked you when we were chatting on the phone the other day. Before we talk to him, I want to do as we normally do, and I'll just tell you very briefly, he's a 60-something-year-old first-generation American of Mexican heritage, i.e. Latino. He's a childhood traumatic brain injury survivor and neurodivergent first-generation college graduate with a BA in Interpersonal Communication, an MS in Conflict Analysis and Resolution, an MTS in Theological Studies, and an MSW in Clinical Social Work with subject matter expertise in conflict mitigation, social care, family caregiving, spiritual discernment, and mental fitness. But before I add Zander to the stage, as is our practice, I'm going to spend a few minutes bringing y'all up to date on happenings in the world of gender news. First up, you may have heard about the Sophie Cunningham, Cheryl Reeve dust-up. That's Sophie Cunningham. And I've noticed there are numbers of girls, maybe in California, who are adopting that pose to show their support for Sophie. Sophie, in 2022, to bring you up to date, she shared a since-deleted tweet from CBS Sports' Josh Pate, who wrote, quote, "Female collegiate athletes deserve so much better than this," end quote, in regards to the former Penn transgender, i.e. male, swimmer, Leah Thomas. Following the retweet, Cunningham wrote her own statement and posted it to X. Yeah, as you can see with this photograph, she is a very aggressive player. She wrote, "To my teammates, friends, family, supporters, and fans, you know that I stand with all people, especially my fellow athletes. I do not judge, but support all races, religions, sexual preferences, and gender equity. We all have a place in this world to compete, and I hope we are able to grant everyone that opportunity fairly." In an interview with ESPN on this past Tuesday, Cunningham spoke on the issue and what she has experienced on social media surrounding it. She said, "I got a lot of negative feedback about me hating trans." And I'm like, I never once said that. And that's what she told the outlet. "I think that I'm here to extend love, but I also think, that love is truth, being honest, and I want to protect young girls in a locker room or young girls in sport who shouldn't have to go against biological men." On Sunday, August 2nd, the Indiana Fever for which Cunningham is guard, met the Minnesota Lynx, coached by Cheryl Reeve, on the court. Reeve wore a blue and pink t-shirt proclaiming "Trans kids belong," and with that, Reeve contributed to a false understanding of what Sophie says she believes, which in turn contributes to what I think is the duplicitous battle of headlines and print, which do more to confuse the issue than to clarify it. Okay, we're having trouble with the Facebook stream. We'll just have to keep going right ahead. The thing that strikes me about this is that trans kids belong is a fair statement, but Sophie Cunningham did not say they don't belong. And there have been quite a few headlines that give the impression that trans kids are being barred from participating in sports, period. And that is just not the case. What Sophie Cunningham said was she doesn't think girls should have to participate, to compete against biological males in sports or share their changing rooms with them. And that is a subject I'll go into in some depth one of these days, which is that the injustice that the journalists are doing. And as I probably have said on this show, I've experienced it quite a bit in my previous life. Second, a group demands federal investigation into trans dolls with removable genitalia that will soon hit Minnesota classrooms. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't have done that probably. A nonprofit is demanding a federal investigation into Minnesota's upcoming rollout of transgender dolls designed to teach kids about the different options that exist for who they can be. Defending Education, a conservative-aligned group that has filed lawsuits against transgender policies in schools, filed a complaint with the Department of Education and the Justice Department over the program that promises to be, quote, first of their kind dolls to classrooms across the North Star State. Although My Gender dolls are reportedly the result of state-funded efforts and intended for use in Minnesota schools, there is no indication in news reports or on the My Gender dolls website that Minnesota parents have been informed about My Gender dolls' forthcoming launch. Said the group. The My Gender dolls feature gender-neutral names such as Sam and are intended to be used for therapeutic activities with children as young as 4 to, quote, learn about the different options that exist for who they can be. So the dolls include over 100 interchangeable accessories, clothing, and hairstyles. And Defending Education has contended that the My Gender Dolls program may have violated multiple federal policies, including the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment and so forth. The Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment restricts federal funds from going to schools that force students to engage in activities, forcing them, quote, to submit to a survey, analysis, or evaluation on their sex behavior or attitudes. The group also cited the 2025 Supreme Court case, Mahmoud v. Taylor, that concluded public schools must give parents notice and an opt-out for certain LGBTQ materials in classrooms. Third, Amnesty International UK has published an apology for a report which classed an Edinburgh, Scotland sexual violence support center set up by J.K. Rowling as, quote, anti-rights. The Harry Potter author threatened Amnesty with legal action over a briefing it published on its website called, quote, a growing threat, the anti-rights movement in the UK. It listed Bera's Place, I'm probably mispronouncing it, a woman-only support service which rolling funds among more than 100 organizations which it characterized as being part of an anti-rights movement. In its apology, Amnesty said the briefing should never have been published, adding that an internal investigation was ongoing into how this happened. Amnesty regret over criticism of J.K. Rowling's Sexual Violence Support Center demands an apology from Amnesty. The briefing, published in July, defined anti-rights actors as groups whose aim is to restrict human rights by undermining human rights protections in law and practice. Many of the organizations it listed were classed as, quote, gender critical, including Bera's Place and For Women Scotland, a campaign group that last year won a landmark case on the legal definition of a woman. While the apology is welcomed, it does not rectify the reputational damage caused to Bera's Place. In particular, the apology fails to recognize that those most severely impacted are the staff who work day in and day out to support survivors of sexual violence and the many women who need and use the service. And the statement went on to say those organizations also deserve a written apology. And that's it for gender news for today. Now we're going to admit Zander Keig to the stage. Do I do that or do you do it, Darla? Darla did it. Good job. Good job. We'll get it all right one of these days. To continue with my introduction, not only is Zander well-degreed, but he is a lesbian whose family was supportive even when they didn't quite understand. He began to transition with testosterone. Wait, I forgot something. Zander was paralyzed, let me back up, was paralyzed at 6 years old, put in a mental hospital as a teen, joined the military at 20, became an undercover drug officer, and has been a social worker for homeless veterans. That in and of itself is some history, Zander. A lesbian, as he realized as a child or a teenager, his family was supportive even when they didn't quite understand. He began to transition with testosterone when he was 39 years old and has been happily married to a woman he met at divinity school for over 2 decades. A recipient of numerous awards, he received the 2020 National Association of Social Workers Social Worker of the Year Award, was a 24th annual Lambda Literary Finalist for Transgender Nonfiction, and was named one of the 50 successful transgender Americans you should know, among other awards and honors. Zander is one of the authors of Letters for My Brothers, Transitional Wisdom in Retrospect, which is a collection of letters from transgender men reflecting on identity, resilience, purpose, and belonging, and which has been translated into Japanese, which is so super cool. Manning Up is another of his authored books. Manning Up, Transsexual Men on Finding Brotherhood, Family, and Themselves. Manifest, Transitional Wisdom on Male Privilege, that provides a new lens to explore feminism, gender, and transgender advocacy. And The Third Space, a Nonconformist Guide to the Universe. A number of documentary films have focused on Zander and other trans men, including Zanderology, directed by Megan Rohrer, Zander is a podcaster, including co-hosting Health Radio Podcast, The Umbrella Hour, and For Trans Guys, and hosts the Third Space Podcast with Zander Keig. He is the founder of the Third Space Institute. Now that I've used up most of our time introducing you, Zander, I do want to welcome you and tell you that we are so glad you're here, and we are here to listen.
Thank you, Ellen. On my screen, I look frozen. I don't know if I'm frozen to you.
You are.
Oh, I'm not sure why that's happening. Hopefully it'll unfreeze soon.
It probably will. It's happened before, but
okay. Yeah. But you can hear me, so
I can hear you and I can see your frozen picture. So with luck, we will unfreeze you. And so I want to ask you, first of all, if you have any thoughts or any anything to add to the gender news that I reported on. And if you don't, that's fine.
No, I had heard the news, not all of it, but little snippets. I'm not on social media, so I don't really get a lot of the news, and I don't tune into news shows. I actually stopped watching the news when I was 16.
Did you?
Yeah,
wow.
I just thought it's never anything good, so I thought I just don't need to watch it. So just stopped watching it. I would read the newspaper from time to time. I grew up in Torrance, California, so we had a little town newspaper called the Daily Breeze, which I thought was
the Daily Breeze.
Yeah, and the LA Times, of course. But yeah.
We have a little paper here called the Elk Valley Times, which comes out once a week and is you can read it in a single sitting.
Yeah, I mean it's impossible to not know what's going on in the world, just because of podcasts and I get a couple of news emails every morning in my inbox that I look over, and that's about it. I'm not taking in other news sources. So I had heard most of what you covered.
Really?
Yeah.
Even being off social media. Well, that's that is something for me to think about, because social media will make you physically ill. You know, especially when people come after you without knowing, having any idea what it is you actually said or what you actually think.
I experience that all the time. So,
I'm sure you do, Zander. I'm sure you do.
Yeah.
So, where do you want to start with this? I was very curious in hearing about your childhood. And if you would like to talk about that, I had not realized you had been paralyzed at 6 years old until I was reading more about you and came across that. Do you want to talk about that? Does that have to do with your brain injury?
Yes. Yeah. When I was just about 6 years old, I was getting ready to go into the first grade, and I was taken to go get my vaccinations, right? Your shots before you start school.
Right.
And one of those shots was the MMR, the measles, mumps, rubella shot. And this was 1972. I was in the Phoenix, Arizona area. And for whatever reason, several kids were ended up very sick from that shot. And we contracted rubella, which is the German measles. And a lot of other things happened. So in my case, I don't know what happened to everybody else. I was too little to be paying attention. And then I was in a coma and things. But I developed the German measles, and then I started having seizures. And my parents, I was living with my mother at the time. My parents were divorced, and she was out of town. So she left me with somebody. I'm not sure who I was with. It's because I was sick. So she left me with maybe her husband's parents, something like that. And the seizures were happening, and they didn't know what to do. So they called the ambulance, and the ambulance came and got me and took me to the hospital. And I guess my seizures were so severe that they put me into a medicated coma. So they put me on a medication that put me into a coma. And while I was in a coma, they were doing all kinds of experimental things to try and figure out what was going on, including a couple spinal taps. And when they brought me out of the coma, and this is just reported from my parents, later on in my life, that I was paralyzed on the whole left side of my body. So what ended up happening is I got encephalitis, which just means
Oh, no.
inflammation of the brain, right? So
Yeah.
the virus went into my brain and caused this inflammation on the right side, which then paralyzed the whole left side of my body, my face, my arm, my leg. And it took about 2 years. I was hospitalized for 2 or 3 months, but then it took about 2 years of physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy to regain my ability to walk and write and, all the things that I had learned to do already. I had to relearn how to do them. And I hadn't started school, so I missed first and second grade and then went into third grade. I'm not sure how that happened. And I went into just regular school because my father didn't want me to be in any special classes. They had suggested I go into special classes, but my father was absolutely against that. By this time, I was living with my father. My mother, the way my mother would explain it is, before the encephalitis, I was quiet. I was very I don't know what would be the word. I could sit and play with my toys for hours without any issue. After the encephalitis, my personality shifted in a fairly significant way. I became much more aggressive, much more physical, wanting to be outside, running around, becoming more impatient. And I had a younger sister in the home with us, 3 years younger, and my mother was worried that I would hurt her because I was a bit, aggressive. So she
Right.
sent me to live with my father. So my father ended up raising me at that point from age 8 in Los Angeles area. And then I just went to school, just mainstreamed back into school. Um, but I had a lot of trouble, of course, because I was behind and I was able to walk on my own. I went from being paralyzed to wearing braces, or being in a wheelchair and then wearing braces and then having crutches and then being able to walk on my
Yeah.
own. But I did have a limp and I did have a sort of a speech impediment as a result that, it took me years to sort of overcome. But by the time I was maybe in, let's see, by maybe sixth grade, I was very athletic. And in middle school, I was, playing soccer and tennis. I was running. In high school, I was in a regular high school for a very short period of time, but when I was in that high school, I competed on the track and field team. So I did long jump, high jump, shot put, a couple of racing, running categories. So I clearly rehabbed well enough, and then I was able to go into the military. But yeah, the encephalitis did cause not just a personality shift, but some learning disabilities as well.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I'm sorry you went through that, and I'm sure you have thoughts on vaccinations and all of that. That is, I mean, when you look into children who say they're trans, there's a lot of talk about comorbidities that were not. I mean, I'm sure you've thought about everything. Do you think that had anything to do with your desire later on? I know we've talked about some of the reasons why you decided to transition, but do you think that your brain injury and your change in personality contributed at all to your desire to change in that respect?
There's really no way to know. It is an interesting question. I haven't actually spent much time thinking about it because it would all be just fantastical, it's I do know that, part of the difference going from a very quiet, sort of self-contained child to being a bit more, boisterous and aggressive and taking risks I that might have been, people might consider that to be not just a personality shift, but also somewhat of a shift in gender expression. But the only reason I would have trouble with that is because I think that sounds quite sexist in that, the way I was before the encephalitis was more like a girl, and the way I was after was more like a boy. We know that there are, sort of quiet and contained or oriented boys and very rambunctious girls.
Right.
So it's the only thing that would make sense is if I believed in that as a working theory, but I don't. Yeah, my mother was very against me being a masculine girl
Right.
and teenager and young woman. She did not like it at all. She didn't have a problem with me being lesbian, but she didn't like me being very masculine.
Right.
And you know, the way I used to think about it is when she would put me into more like feminine clothing, I just I felt and I just looked like I was in the wrong clothes,
Right.
because of the way I walked and the way I stood and the way I
Right.
sat. I was just a bit more, oh yeah, there you go. What am I? I'm like maybe 21 there.
Oh, were
Um,
you? I thought you were somewhat younger, but 21.
yeah,
Okay. So that's
I
about the
think
time you went
because,
into.
well, maybe a little bit older because I'm out of the military then already. So maybe 23,
Ah,
24, something like that. Yeah, that's in Santa Cruz actually at the boardwalk.
you've
Um,
got that, what do they call that haircut?
Mullet.
A mullet. It's a good mullet. It worked for you.
I was gonna say,
Mullets have a
I think
bad.
I carried it off well.
You did. You did. You carried it off.
And that Guatemalan fanny pack, I was rocking it.
And this
Yeah,
is you at.
probably around 34. This is when I was in college. So maybe 32,
Oh,
33, something like that. This is when I was a college student. And this was a series of photographs that were taken for the college newspaper. I had been elected to well, I was first running for a position of vice president of communication for the student government. And so they took pictures, of all of us to put in the student newspaper. And this was one of the photographs that accompanied an article about me in the student newspaper at my college.
yeah. Very, very, very nice photo.
Yeah. I
Very
was
nice
I was
photo.
very androgynous, people would say, but what's really interesting, Ellen, is that people always mistook me for a boy or, like a young man back then, and I would get called sir a lot. And
Uh-huh.
I
Yeah.
think I saw myself as like, masculine, but in an androgynous way. I wasn't like uber masculine. There is a difference. I used to know those like really, really butch, women that and I wasn't that. I was sort of in between the butch and femme, so to speak, is sort of a language that some people use. And so I thought of myself as very androgynous, but didn't really understand why people thought I was a guy. And when I look at that picture now, I'm like, I see myself as like so like feminine in a way, right?
Hmm.
Yes, I have short hair, but I think when I look at that picture compared to how I look now, I'm like, I clearly don't look like a guy in that picture. But maybe,
Huh.
maybe the different eyes I do. It's like I'm comparing my masculinity then to my masculinity now as far as the way I
Right.
appear. Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
kind of funny.
Yeah. kind of must be a little bit of an odd feeling.
Well, there's a trans guy. I have a friend. His name is Maxwell Valerio, and he wrote a book called The Testosterone Files. It came out, a couple decades ago. And in the book, he talked about how he would go to like gay and lesbian bars and started to notice over a period of time that the butchest women, in comparison to how he was masculinizing on the testosterone, were starting to appear to him to be more and more feminine.
That is okay. Say that again. I'm not sure I tracked you on that.
Yeah. So as he was masculinizing on his testosterone,
Right.
and he was around lesbians who were masculine for for a woman, the further he went along in his transition, the more he was masculinizing. His voice was deepening, right? His face was changing shape. His facial hair was coming in. The more that happened, the less and less masculine, or more and more feminine, the butcher women looked to him in comparison.
Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah. And then I had that experience
really...
too. And then I read his book and I was like, oh yeah, like I hadn't remembered that I had read that. And then when I reread it, I was like, oh, I had that experience, because I do it just looking at my pictures of myself,
Yeah. Well, that's okay. I've never heard anybody say that before. So that's very interesting to me. Yeah.
I hadn't
very
either.
Interesting.
Just me and Max. Other people may have said it, but I also haven't heard it said. Yeah.
And so you told me when we were talking that one of the reasons you decided to transition was not because you felt you were a man trapped in a woman's body or anything like that, but because it just seemed to be, and you should say it because, oh, look, you're unfrozen. No, you're frozen
for
again.
A moment. For a moment.
For a glorious second, you were moving around. That it just got to be kind of a drag. People always, there you go. Okay, fingers crossed. A kind of a drag, but you can tell it better than I can. Being thought to, having people think you were a man or a boy or yes, sir, when you weren't, and it just seemed simpler somehow to go ahead and transition. I'm sure I haven't put that totally accurately.
I mean, I don't think it would surprise anybody to know that there are consequences for being gender transgressive, right? Tomboys and sissy boys, right?
Yeah.
Get bullied, and have different experiences in their families, right? Based on their culture, and other things. So it's among our peers, out in public, just, going to the convenience store or the gas station, I would just be approached, or I would see people across, the way, who took issue with my transgressiveness, my boyishness as a teenager and then as a young adult. And, some people would just stare at me. Other people would make snide comments, and some people would get, kind of verbally abusive towards me. And on a few occasions, I was approached in a more aggressive way, like people wanted to beat me up. I was in a handful of fist fights with 20-something-year-old men, young men. It's like I never really understood why it's not as if I just stood aside and was not bringing any attention to myself. I was probably bringing attention to myself. I mean, look at that picture of me and my mullet. I'm wearing a t-shirt that has a big pink triangle with the state of California. And if anybody, a lot of people might not know, but prior to the rainbow flag, and even for a time after the rainbow flag, that pink triangle was one of the symbols of the gay and lesbian liberation. It comes from the Holocaust.
Right.
right? And so it was it was a reclamation of a symbol. I learned eventually from some of my Jewish friends that when they wore buttons like that home or to a family function with much older Jewish relatives, they didn't take too kindly to seeing that imagery. And so I stopped wearing it altogether. I mean, my family's Mexican and Catholic, but still I thought, I'm not going to wear something that causes that kind of reaction in people. But so it wasn't as if I was hiding anything. I walked down the street holding hands with my girlfriends. So I did draw attention to myself. And when I noticed somebody was like staring at me, or if they said something to me, I wasn't meek. And I might say something back to them like, "What the F are you looking at, a-hole?" You know what I mean? I was aggressive and assertive. And so that, I got into some trouble. But I had other altercations or incidents where just wanting to go into the bathroom, right? And so being a gender transgressive person, going into the women's bathroom, I experienced everything from, just regular people doing nothing to people being confused why I was there, stepping back and like looking at the sign to make sure they were in the right place, or approaching me and saying, "Excuse me, sir, you're in the wrong bathroom," to then, or calling me names. "Hey, effing the D word, dyke," which I didn't take offense to, but they were using it in that tone. And then one time in particular, I was in a bathroom at a public train station, and a group of teenage girls came into the bathroom, and they were very unhappy with my presence in the bathroom, and shoved me, pushed me up against the wall, were starting to kind of like punch at me, but then somebody came into the bathroom, and I was able to get out of there without any additional abuse. But so you know did it happen every day? No. But it happened often enough that I got to a point when I was in my mid-30s where I thought, "You know what? Like, I this is no fun. People are unkind. I'm drawing a lot of attention to myself, and I wasn't sure what could I do to stop drawing attention." And all the things that I came up with, I just wasn't willing to do. I wasn't going to just fem it up and start wearing more feminine clothing or putting on makeup or style my hair differently or go into the closet and not hold hands with girlfriends, and like I just wasn't going to do it. I refused to do that kind of thing. And so I had seen a documentary called "You Don't Know Dick" in 1995 or 96, and it was the first feature-length documentary film that was focused on trans men. And I was like, "Well, now that's interesting." And then a year later, I saw a book called Body Alchemy by a trans man, and it showed like before and after pictures. And that's when I saw it. Oh, like those are lesbians who medically transitioned. I mean, we didn't talk that way, but took tea and were now living their lives. And I thought, you know what? I wonder if I could do that. But that was in 1996, and I didn't start hormones until 2005. So I was continuing to just go along, and but I had no issue with my body or my identity. The idea of like born in the wrong body makes no sense to me. I was just happy to have a body that was working, considering my background. And I was I didn't have any issue with being, lesbian, and my family had no issue at all with me being lesbian. I had no problem in my Mexican Catholic family. I'm first generation. All my family's from Mexico. Nobody cared. So I didn't have that pushback from my family, which is very nice. I also didn't get a lot of I didn't get any pushback at all from my family, and I didn't get any negative feedback from the parish either, right? The Catholic Church that I attended and the Catholic school I went to. So it's one of those things where it wasn't close to me. It was further away from me. But I started thinking about, is it going to be this way when I'm in my 40s and 50s and 60s? And it dawned on me at one point, like if I took testosterone, right? My thinking was, if I just went more towards the masculine, that people would stop seeing me as a gender transgressive person, when in fact I was being even more transgressive. I mean, if you think about it, right? It's even more transgressive. It's even more violating gender norms to do what I've done, but it also creates a type of invisibility, so that I wasn't going to be, harassed in the same way. And so that's what I thought, and I went and talked to a doctor, and I told her, I said, "Listen, I don't feel born in the wrong body. I don't feel like I'm not going to kill myself if you say no. I don't have that backstory of I've known since I was, 4 or 5. I have no memories of 4 or 5. The encephalitis wiped my memories, and most people
Yeah.
don't have memories of 4 and 5, really. It's not really how the brain works, but
Yeah, I don't. Yeah.
yeah. So I didn't have the typical or expected story, but the doctor, what she said to me, and she had been working with transgender patients for 12 years at that point. So that was 2005. She said, hardly anybody has that story, but a lot of people tell it anyway. And so that told me something, that, right, that there were
Yeah.
people who either were making it up, or they believed it because somebody had told them that's how you're supposed to feel.
Right. Right.
And I just, it wasn't true for me, and I wasn't going to say it, right? I wasn't going to say it if it wasn't true. And
Yeah.
I could have possibly been denied, like, no, we're not going to give you this prescription, but the doctor didn't do that.
Yeah. Darla, okay, so she's got You Don't Know Dick, Courageous Hearts of Transsexual Men, 1997 documentary.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it officially came out in 1997, but in 1997 I was already in college, and I had seen it before I started college. So they must have shown like a pre-release, because I went to a gay and lesbian film festival in San Diego, and so they must have had maybe a pre-release version, or a shorter version, or unedited version that we saw. But it was definitely in 1995, because that's when I went to Colorado to start college, and I saw it
Yeah.
before I went to Colorado. So
Interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, documentaries can totally change our perspective. Sorry, I was distracted because I was wanting to create a banner, putting up the name of the book, and there we go.
Yeah, I think
I'll
people
put it
can
in the
still
show
get it.
notes.
It's considered, I think, it's considered like an educational film. Yeah. I sent them an email once a few years back, and I said, you should do a follow-up with all the guys and call it You Still Don't Know Dick.
That is a very humorous title for a book that I accept at face value that it was meant to be educational, but it's not like educational in the sense that you would, run these shows in the school room, these, get the
Yeah, definitely not.
big
It's college. I would
machines.
imagine college level, maybe in like a human sexuality course or something.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. So yeah, you go against the grain in many respects on the traditional or the expected narrative.
Yeah.
I think
But it's not intentional to be rebellious.
No, I don't
I
think.
just I have my own compass, and I follow it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, when we were first talking, I jumped to the conclusion that because your family were Mexican and you were Mexican American, that there would have been some sort of very extreme feelings about being gay, or those kinds of things. And then, Roman Catholic that that says it's even more so. And you're saying that's not the way it was.
No,
And I
it was
appreciate
not an
that.
issue. I
Yeah,
had a-
those were not the issues. The issues were how people were on the outside were responding.
Yeah, it's like
You
I didn't
said,
have any issues with myself, and my family did. It makes sense to me that individuals who are growing up in a family, and in a culture, like maybe a religious culture, um, or ethnic or racial culture, where there is a lot of negative, sentiments, feelings, teachings, but I didn't get that. And so I think as a result, I didn't have any of that internalized,
right.
people would, because I think people think, oh, people who transition have internalized homophobia. And it's like, no,
Yeah.
I was perfectly happy being a lesbian. I mean, because I'm female, I look like how I look, but I'm still technically female, and I'm with the same partner that I was with before I started testosterone. Um, and so if lesbian means same-sex attracted, well, then I'm still lesbian. But that's
Yeah.
not really that's not there's the difference between the definition and then what we see in the world, right?
Mhm.
Nobody sees me as a lesbian. Now, there are people who are going to be completely convinced that, I don't know, I'm mentally ill, I'm delusional, I'm and they're going to refer to me with female pronouns and call me a lesbian. And that's perfectly fine. I have no interest whatsoever in compelling people's speech. And all I ask is in return that they let me speak how I want to speak, and I'll
Yeah.
let them speak, and they let me believe how I want to believe, and they can believe how they want to believe. And I'm perfectly happy with that. And I don't have any intentions of trying to, subvert, reality in a earth-shattering way. I don't think what I've done causes, a massive ripple in the time, space continuum.
Right.
It's actually the opposite of that. My life is much more easy and content and happy. It's basically the opposite. And it wasn't because I was unhappy because of being a lesbian or because of anything cultural. It was just because of having to see people's looks on their face. And I remember telling a therapist once, not my therapist, I was just talking to a person who happened to be a therapist, about what I was experiencing and how I was feeling about it. And she was trying to get me to understand that that was my interpretation, and I didn't really know what was motivating people to look at me the way they were looking at me or say the things they were saying to me. And on the surface, it made perfect sense.
Mhm.
And at the same time, it really didn't help me feel any better about it.
Yeah.
It's like, sure, I have no control over what they do or say, what they believe, and what they want me to do. But I also don't want to spend, chunks of my life having to see contempt or disgust or fear in people's eyes. That's unpleasant. Um,
Yeah, it
if it
is.
was if it was infrequent, it probably wouldn't have bothered me as much as it did. But the older I got, the more and more it was happening. So there was
Yeah.
something about being a tomboy was less transgressive, being, in the military and, being in uniform and having short hair, like that wasn't so transgressive. There's lots of really short-haired masculine women in the military. It was when I got out, right, in my 30s, and that's when I started to notice that people were much more offended by my masculine, presentation. So
Yeah. So that's another very interesting piece. I noticed you've got on a T-shirt
yes.
that says something about veterans.
Yeah, it says Cohen Veterans Network. It's a network of community-based mental health clinics that serves veterans and their families. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I used to work at a Cohen veteran clinic in Jacksonville, Florida. So
I think we
one
have
of
a
their.
picture of you.
Oh
in
yeah,
a T-shirt, a white.
there
we
you go. Yeah, that's the
And it
transgender.
says, yeah.
Yeah, that says Transgender Military Summit. The Transgender American Veterans Association, which I was serving on the board of at this time, we had a conference in Washington, D.C. And so that was the conference title and the logo for the conference. And I'm wearing a Coast Guard cap. And what I'm doing actually is I'm tabling at a Pride event in Tampa or Clearwater, Florida for the Transgender American Veterans Association. That was probably 2019.
Yeah. I'm very interested in the path your life has taken, going into social work. I suppose you counsel military, transgender military veterans, and that whole being involved in wellness and well-being and sort of calming ourselves, that kind of thing. I'm very curious about that. Am I getting it right, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's in the general direction. When I was in my Master of Social Work program in my second year, I did my internship at a VA hospital in the residential psychiatric unit. And then when I graduated, my first job right out of my program was at a VA up in San Francisco, working with the Healthcare for Homeless Veterans program. And so that's what I did. I worked with veterans. Some of them were, trans, or gay or lesbian. There weren't very many women, gay and trans women primarily. And, but I was also appointed to 2 national VA work groups, one that was employee specific and one that was patient care specific, because I served in a dual role because I was a social worker at the VA, and I've also been using the VA as a patient since 1988. So I was able to contribute, from both of those perspectives. And so it was a LGBT veteran patient care group at the VA, a work group on the national level, and we worked on trainings and updating policies, things like that. So I did have some work that I did that related to working with transgender veterans. And then I moved over to the Department of Defense and I worked with the US Navy. And a month after I started working there was when the memo came out from the Department of Defense saying transgender service members are going to be able to serve openly and do a medical transition on active duty starting on October 1st of 2016. And so in July of 2016, I was invited by the commanding officer for the medical center in San Diego. She invited me to come and be part of what was going to become the transgender care team for Navy Medicine West. And I was appointed the case manager for that team. I was the first person appointed, and I was responsible for creating the intake and orientation process and helping them decide like all the different disciplines that should be part of this team. And we had, probably a dozen people that were part of the team. It was a very good group. Maybe half were in uniform and the other half were civilian staff. And I did that for 3 years. I worked with upwards of about 325 active duty sailors and Marines and coasties, as we call ourselves in the Coast Guard, and who had command approval to go through a medical transition while they were on active duty. And Navy Medicine West covered the Western United States, South America, Central America, the Pacific Islands, Asia. So my patients were spread all over that area. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed doing that work. And then when I went to work for the Cohen Veterans Clinic, that was in Jacksonville, Florida, and that was actually doing clinical, meaning psychotherapy. Whereas before I was a case manager. I worked case management with homeless veterans, case management with the transgender active duty individuals. But then at Cohen's, I was doing psychotherapy. Yeah.
I want to read this comment from from our friend Grant, who drops by pretty regularly. He says a therapist who just reads the recipe is the worst. I think I know what he means by that because I've encountered that a little bit myself. I haven't done much therapy, but
what does that mean?
I think he means as soon as you see somebody reading from the manual who's not really listening to you, but is going by what the manual says. Like the last time I went, I thought I had to go to some counseling, and for reasons I can't even remember anymore. But the first thing she said was, "What do you hope to get out of this?" And I'm like, from that moment, I was like, you read that in a book somewhere, you know?
Well,
And it just
it's kind of
turned
it's a basic question. What brings you in today?
Yeah, what brings you in today is not the same thing. To
Yeah, that's a
me, it
social
just
work
felt
question. We're
it
all
just
trained in so
felt
many
like the
different ways.
manual.
Well, here's the
Yeah,
thing about manualized therapy is that so if a person's going through something like cognitive behavioral therapy or dialectical behavioral therapy, these are manualized treatment modalities, and the reason they are is because they've been studied and they know that they're effective if they're followed. If people are just winging it, then they can wing it, but that's not the same. But we know from research that the the most important thing between a patient and a therapist, or a client and a therapist, is rapport, right? It really doesn't matter what your theoretical orientation is, what intervention model you use. None of those things have as much influence as the rapport between the therapist and the client. But if people are getting therapy through a kind of program like the VA or the DoD or a research institute, it's gonna be a manualized version of therapy because that's how it's done.
so
Yeah.
Grant followed up with additional comments. He said,
Oh,
"I'm
good.
referring to Zander's experience with a therapist who just said you can't control how others react,
Well,
etc."
that's
And then
true, right?
he followed up by saying they dismissed your experience for the
Oh,
boilerplate explanation questioning.
oh, yeah.
That's his take.
I disagree with that. Just personally, it's like that to me is just a truism. I can't control what other people do or say or think or believe. That's not in my control. And I think that being able to know that and acknowledge it and live from that place has afforded me a lot of peace of mind.
Yeah.
So yeah, I didn't feel dismissed or discounted at all. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
but some people would, and that's just because we're all different. That's okay too.
Yeah.
That's okay. But what I do now is I'm not a psychotherapist, I'm a psychoeducator. And so what that means is I teach people the tools that they need to increase their well-being, mental and physical and social and spiritual and financial well-being. And the way to do that is not to fixate on all the problems that you have and all the problems in the world. That's not how we increase our wellness or our well-being. So I guess I fall in line with the way, and it wasn't a therapist, it was a physician that told me that. But yeah, I never did see a therapist before I transitioned for the purpose of transitioning. I didn't need to do that.
Well, Grant says thanks for the additional explanation and sharing.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, Grant and I, we have a great relationship, and we argue all the time.
Yeah. Well, I see Darla put a comment too about the worst is when the therapist has not done their work to begin their own healing. I mean, maybe again, I'm being a little harsh, but who has? Right? If we're only going to go to a therapist who's done their own healing, there aren't going to be very many therapists around.
That's
Right?
true. That's true.
That's a really high bar to set. I think that's I don't expect that. yeah, it's like, and do our work. It's like that can be a lifetime engagement. Now, of course, we don't want to have therapists that are not following a treatment program for their bipolar disorder, right? We don't want people that are delusional while they're working with, patients or clients. We don't want people that are so deep into their depression that they can't really focus on what people are saying, or abusing substances. That's for sure. Um, but I think that we're all learning and growing, and we can extend grace to each other, and not expect that the therapist is going to actually fix us. In a lot of ways, what their role can be is to just help us come up with our own questions and our own answers.
Yeah, Darla followed up by saying she has talked to counselors who wanted to talk about themselves
Oh,
more
yeah.
than anything, is what I was
Yeah.
talking about. And I have
Yeah.
had that experience too,
Yeah. Well, that's poor
where
boundaries.
somebody,
Yeah.
and I mean, this, without going into it, yeah, he wanted to talk more about his own problems
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
had a lot of
Yeah.
formulas. And so I think I just got a hold of a bad therapist, but I know other therapists that
Yeah.
I think must just do fantastic work.
Well, I
Um,
just think that not everybody goes through as rigorous of a training, program to learn about how to have personal and professional boundaries, but there are actually some theoretical orientations that might be a bit more humanistic or postmodern, that blur the line between personal and professional, and it's a bit tricky. I don't do that, but I do know therapists that do reveal or disclose a lot of their own self to the clients, and it's not my style, and I would say that it's really good for people to learn about the therapists they're going to go see before they go see them. Like, are they a marriage and family therapist? Are they a licensed professional counselor? Are they a mental health counselor? Are they a licensed clinical social worker? Are they a psychologist? And you can go to their website and you can read about them. Like, what's their theoretical orientation? What are the intervention models they use? What are the different populations they work with? What are the different issues that they work with? Where did they go to school? And you can learn enough about them to see if they'd be a match or not, because you could look it up. What
Yeah.
does it mean to be a phenomenological therapist, or what does it mean to be a person who is more dynamic in the way that they relate to their patients or clients? It's a
That's similar.
psychotherapist. Yeah.
What you're saying is similar to what my husband used to say. He's a retired lawyer, and he would
Mm-hmm.
say, if you're trying to sell your property and you go to a divorce attorney, you're probably
Yes.
going to come out with a divorce and not having sold your property.
Exactly. Exactly. It's that kind of a thing. We're all trained very differently
Yeah.
in all these different programs, and so it's just good to know. It's good to know at least the basics
Yeah.
before you start. You sign up for multiple sessions for sure.
Well, yeah. Yeah. I want to switch tracks a little bit. We've gone
Okay.
now for just over an hour, and I don't want to keep you all night. Um, with everything you've been through, everything you've learned, and all of that, um, I think I mentioned to you, my perception of what it means to be transgender has changed over the years. And what I'm trying to get at, and I'm not putting it very well, is that over time, if we're paying attention, we tend to change our mind about certain things. Maybe not the whole thing, but certain things.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you were, say, if you were in today's climate, and you were back at, say, 20 or 30 years old, do you think you would have taken the same path, or do you think, or have there been such changes in our culture and the way we think about gay and lesbian and all of that? And that's probably a very intrusive question, but I'm very curious as to what you think, because now you're in your 60s and you've seen the same changes we've all seen. Do you think you would do it again, or how would you handle it?
I have no idea. You know,
it's a real hypothetical, isn't it?
it is. I'm not very good with those. I mean, if you think about it, when I started testosterone in 2005, we did not have legalized gay marriage, right, or same-sex marriage. We didn't
Right.
have open military service, even for gay and lesbian and bisexual service members. We didn't have adoption available in all 50 states for gay and lesbian couples. We didn't we didn't have any of those things, and so the environment was much. I think, to me, the environment was much more hostile then than it is now. So, I
You're
mean,
saying more hostile in terms of how people respond to what we
no,
might
because
call
it was
butch
just things were
lesbians.
illegal. Like,
Oh, okay.
I mean, like you could be thrown out of the military, or you could
Right.
just be denied a marriage, license. You'd be turned away if you wanted to adopt a child. You could be kicked out of a restaurant. I had the experience of being, thrown out of restaurants because we were, setting the customers, right? So there were things like that were going on that probably still happen today, but there is at least legal recourse for them now that there wasn't before.
That's one of the things Jessie Harris talked about, and you told me that you and she had communicated somehow, but
Yeah, I
she
interviewed her.
said,
Yeah.
"Oh, you did? Okay." She said, one of the reasons she transitioned was that being a lesbian, and more or less overtly lesbian, she was in constant danger of losing her daughter to either the state or the county, and of losing her job.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
right. And
Yeah,
those
those things were
things
happening.
were happening back
Especially,
then.
yeah, especially if somebody, turned you in and said that you were, an abusive parent or a neglectful parent, or yeah,
Well,
I mean,
we had that entire episode, a corollary to the Red Scare, when we had the Lavender Scare in the State Department, and people were just accused of being gay, and it was assumed that if they were gay, they were a threat to our national security. And that, I mean, that to me, it's almost incomprehensible. It's not totally incomprehensible to me right now, but it's almost.
Well, and I was served in the military prior to Clinton's Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which went into effect in 1994, and so I served in the 1980s, and so it was. But I was in the Coast Guard, so it was a little bit different because it wasn't Department of Defense. They weren't going after gays and lesbians in the Coast Guard in the same way that they were in the Army and the Navy and some the other services. So I was perfectly fine, and I felt like I wasn't in danger of being kicked out of the military. I was not kicked out for that reason, and I wasn't kicked out at all. But you know what I mean. But I'm glad that I didn't transition in my 20s. I think I probably would have been really obnoxious because I was I was still I was a hothead, when I was in my 20s, and
We can be full of ourselves.
well, it makes sense to me because, when you're younger, there's so little that so you know a lot about those small amount of things, so you think you know everything, right? I mean, it does make sense. Our worlds are kind of smaller when we're younger, but then you get to a point where you're like, I don't know jack. Like
Yeah.
I don't know most things, so I'm just going to give
Yeah.
up. Even
Mostly I
trying
don't
to.
know.
Yeah, I don't know
So
either.
what was your response to Don't Ask, Don't Tell? Do you recall? Did
Well,
you think it
I
was a
mean,
good thing, a bad thing, helpful, or?
I did think it was a good thing at first. But then I found out that the discharges of gay and lesbian service members increased after Don't Ask, Don't Tell was put
Oh,
into
really?
practice. Yeah, they
I
didn't
don't think I
decrease,
knew
they
that.
increased.
Mm.
So it was when I went to the recruiting station, I went with my aunt. She drove me over there, and the recruiter said to me, "Are you a homosexual?" And I just sat there quietly, and I just was looking at him, and I looked over at my aunt, and then I looked back at him, and he said, "Do you have a girlfriend?" And I said, "No, sir." And he's like, "Sign here," because I was like, "Well, I'm not going to lie to these people."
Yeah.
You know,
Oh.
I because I had no idea they were going to ask me that question.
Mhm. Yeah.
So blatantly like that. But of course, serving in the Coast Guard, especially in San Diego where I was, I had a nice group of friends that we all lived on base, and maybe it'll surprise people to hear, but most of them were gay and lesbian. There's a lot of gay and lesbian people in the military.
Yeah. It's
So.
a good way to leave some things behind, I would think.
Well, it's also a good way as a woman to earn the same pay for the same job, wear the same clothes, and not have to be, super girly. For me, it was a nice place to work. I enjoyed it a
Yeah.
lot. My father was in the Marine Corps. My uncles were all in the military. I was raised in a military family, so it was something that I knew I was going to do from a young age. But I don't know. Um, Part of me wonders if I'd be really confused right now because I think things were simpler when I started my transition, right? There were trans men and trans women, and then there were drag queens and drag kings, and there were female impersonators and cross dressers. You know what I mean? Like things were a little simpler. And then, of course, there were gay men and lesbian women, and they had a range of different kinds of gender expressions from, really flamey gay guys to like super masculine gay guys and super feminine lesbians to super masculine, right? And you could see that within the trans world as well, transsexual world in particular. Whereas now there's so many identities, there's so many labels, there's so many different things that I don't know how anybody makes sense of it anymore. Um, eh, what I don't really understand is the idea that somebody is transitioning because they don't fit stereotypical expectations of their sex. I hear people talk that way, mostly parents about their kids who are gender nonconforming, and they'll say, like, oh, they never like to do like traditional boy things or girl things. And it's like, well, yeah, but a lot of kids are like that. And they might be gay kids or lesbian kids or straight kids. There's no way to know if they're going to grow up to be a transsexual. Yeah, I mean, like, there's no way to know that they're going to do that.
Yeah.
So it's
I
like
agree.
maybe I could have just continued on as an androgynous, woman, and you know, I mean, I had a good enough life, right? There was really no complaints except for all that external stuff that I could avoid a little bit, which is, I mean, that's part of why I went to college and then grad school and then seminary and then grad school again. So I kind of stayed out of the workforce, and I did that because it was a easier place to exist,
Mhm.
was on a college campus. So, I did stay in school for like 10 years. Um, you
Yeah, I
know,
was in school for a long time too.
and I liked it. It kept me out of, because when I was working in business, or I was a school teacher for a little while, the expectations of how I was supposed to dress right, were just so uncomfortable for me. And so if I dressed how I was comfortable dressing, then I'd have to deal with the kids being little jerks about it. You know what I mean? And I could rise above that, but it was like all the time, it's like, ugh,
Yeah.
what a hassle to not, so I was like, I'm just not going to teach anymore. So I just stopped doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So being able to live my life the way I live it now, I can basically do any job I want. I can walk down the street. I can go into the bathroom. To me, it's that in and of itself has made all of this the right choice for me. And it wasn't
Right.
because of how I was born or because I was in the wrong body or because it has nothing to do with any of that for me. It
Yeah.
may for other people, that's what I hear people say, but for me it didn't. And for me, it was just wanting to live my life with as a little extra friction as possible. There's always going to be stressors in life. And I thought if I could reduce or eliminate um, like a whole category of stressors, how might that impact me? It turns out it impacted me very well, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
I
let
have
me,
zero regrets. You know what I mean?
yeah.
It's a good
Well,
life.
I'm glad.
21 years now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm really glad about that.
Thank you.
One final question, and then I'll just totally turn it over to you for any last words you might have. What do you find are the major issues facing trans men today? I mean, you write about finding brotherhood and fellowship and so forth and so on. What are the major issues that keeps trans men from finding fellowship or anything along that line? And you're moving again.
I am. Well, a lot of us are invisible. And so because we're invisible, we don't see each other. Right? So if we want to congregate together and um, then we have to make our presence known. We have to say, "Hi, I'm so and so. I'm a trans man. I'm starting a discussion group, or I'm putting together a book group, or we're going to go camping, or whatever it is." Right? So you have to make yourself known, and we're very invisible, right? When you hear about trans people in the news, they very rarely show trans men. They're showing either trans women or people who are maybe more like cross-dressers or people that are not like me. Maybe they're people who are non-binary, but that is not as common, right? You're going to see mostly trans women, and I don't know why that is. Maybe they consider it to be more sensationalist, but we're not as visible, and we're also not as included in things. So when people are putting together a group, a panel, an event, sometimes a trans men are like an afterthought. Oh, maybe we should get a trans man. So like I've been invited to speak on panels or present to at conferences, and sometimes it's because they've noticed, oh, we don't have any trans men. We used to have trans men's events. So we had a conference for about 15 years called Gender Odyssey in Seattle that for the first few years was exclusively FTM or trans men. And then it opened up to what were called at the time genderqueer people, which would probably be similar to non-binary people, but this is before non-binary is being used. And then trans women started to come. So we basically, as trans men, we lost that conference. There used to be an FTM conference in Atlanta that was focused on exercise and fitness and wellness and sports. It was called FTM Fitness in Atlanta, and then it just became like trans fitness. There used to be a trans men of color conference that happened in Texas. I think they might have called it something like Black and Brown Trans Men. Now I think it just became like Black and Brown Trans Conference, right? So a lot of the things that were set up specifically for trans men, we don't have much success in holding on to those things because other people come to them and find that there aren't any speakers speaking about their experience or workshops that are covering their issues or vendors that are providing information or services or goods that they relate to. So they say, this conference wasn't for me. And it's like, well, yeah, because it's for us. Like there's probably like 20 or 30 conferences for trans people around the United States. And most of them are almost exclusively for trans women. But we had this one conference and then we had that one thing, so as of right now, there's only a couple of things that exist that are exclusively for trans men. And one of them is a camping association that is on hiatus this year. But that's it. There's another gathering that I think they call something like trans masculine or trans mask, which I'm not exactly sure what that means. That's not language I use to describe myself. I'm a transsexual man, right. And so so the things that I get engaged with now are things that are specifically for trans men. That's my community. That's where I feel most comfortable. But it's harder and harder to find those things, and it's harder and harder to find us, right? In the history, if you do an internet search for like transgender history, it's going to take you a while to get some good trans guy history. We're just left out of the narrative, and that's been an issue all along. It's just a continuing issue that we experience as a community.
That's very interesting. I keep saying that. It's like my favorite word tonight. But it is to me because I haven't really heard anybody express that. And it seems to me that that's another sort of a corollary to men and women's sports or something like that, where there are times when you need these boundaries. There are times when it needs to be just women.
We have a unique
experience, trans men, and not have it be taken over by trans women or journalists or people the kind of people who follow the latest trends.
It's my friend and mentor Jameson Green wrote a book 20 something years ago called Becoming a Visible Man, and it's not just his own personal journey he's describing there. It's like the invisibleness, and part of it is due to the fact that I just blend in. I leave my house, and everywhere I go, people aren't looking at me like, is that really a guy? Like, that's not happening. And so what happens, to me and people like me is if we go into trans spaces where there are a lot of people that are younger or earlier in their transition, or they're not on hormones at all, but they're doing like a non-binary or trans mask kind of experience, even to them, they don't know that I'm a trans man, right? It's because I listen to detransitioners talk quite often. I listen to podcasts with detransitioners because I'm very interested in that story, and I've heard some of them say things like, I just had to realize one day I was never really going to look like a man. I was never going to grow a beard, and I thought to myself, I don't think they ever met trans men. Now they can make choices for themselves and decide that they didn't want to go forward, but if part of the reason why is because they never had any exposure to the fact that there are trans men that look like I do. Like, this isn't glued onto my face, this beard. This grew because of the testosterone, because of my genetics. You know, I come from hairy people. You know, it's just, you know, the Spaniards, you know, just hairy people. But it's like, when, you know, some people, they do say things like, if you don't see yourself, then it's hard maybe for some people to move forward. Whereas some of us, like, I didn't need to see anybody who looked like me to know where I was going. I made my own path. But some people really do need to see that there are people living their lives in a way that they think they'd like to, in order to know what is going to happen in, you know, in the long run. There's no guarantee, of course. We don't know what their genetics are, and we don't know what their dosage is, right? And so
Yeah.
that makes a difference. We don't know how sensitive their hormone receptors are in their body, right? There's a lot of things that go into that. It's not just a matter of putting hormones in and it just does all these things. There's a lot of factors. So I just got lucky.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, not so much. It took the hair off my head, but you know, that's okay.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm getting a little thin too, but that's a story for another day. I don't much like it, but so we've gone an hour and a half, and I want to give you the last word, and maybe the question I could ask you, or maybe you have another question, if there's something I didn't ask you that you wish I had, or if what it is you would like us to take away from our time together, our viewers.
Well, I mean, we all have to live our lives, you know, according to our own moral compass. That's how I've chosen to direct my life, and other people are going to have, you know, their own reason for doing what they do, and then there's going to be people who don't like at all what I've done, and that's perfectly legitimate. I don't like everything I've done in life either, right? And there are lots of things I don't like that people do. I mean, I don't live in a perfect world, so I don't expect it. But I just say, you know, be true to yourself, and if you're true to yourself, then you know who you are, and just live from that place, and don't let other people's judgments and other people's criticism stop you from knowing who you are and living how you want to live. It's as simple as that. As long as we're not doing things that are encroaching on other people's, right? It's what is it? There's that saying that's like, your rights end at the tip of my nose, or something like that. You know, as long as there's not a violation of a law. And now I have done that. I have violated laws. And that's only because when I lived in Florida and they passed that law that said that going to the restroom in a government building was based on your biological sex. I'm sorry, but I'm not going in the women's bathroom, and I don't think they want me in there. But they don't make those. So here's another example. They don't make those laws with trans men in mind. Because if they did, they'd think about another option, because what they're doing is they're forcing people who look like me to go into women's bathrooms, but we don't. We go in the men's bathroom. And so that's, you know, I feel like that's kind of a law that I should break. I live in Oregon now, so they don't have laws like that. But
yeah, well, I've broken a couple of laws.
But you know, it's like, live your best life. Live your best life. Don't encroach on anybody else's. You know, we're in the United States. It's a free country. And so direct yourself and but be kind to people, and for people who want to tell me I'm not who I am and I shouldn't call myself what I call myself, to me that sounds like an authoritarian, and I don't care if you're a left or right authoritarians. I don't take too kindly to bullies, and so I just I ignore that. I ignore that
Yeah.
kind of talk, and so nobody's going to compel me to use a pronoun that I don't want to use, and nobody's going to also compel me to denounce, my transsexuality. Like I go in both directions with that.
Yeah.
I live in my best life, so go live your best life. Yeah.
Well, those are very good words for us to wrap up on. And this has been a very, very interesting, and I hate to say this, you'd think I could come up with a better word, informative, interesting and informative, which is what
Good.
everybody has to say about every book they've ever read. But I'm short on coming up with more original things to say, but it has been enlightening, might be a better way to say it. And interesting. Yeah. So, Zander, thank you for coming on. We really appreciate it. The latchkey will be out for you if you ever want to come back, if you know
Okay.
what that saying means. You
I
know what the
don't, but
latchkey is out for? I've explained this before, and for some reason I say that a lot. It has to do with if you've got a door and you carve out a little hole in it and you put the key through it because you want to latch, you want to shut the door and you want to latch it. But what you're trying to do is keep dogs from coming in, not a person from coming in. So the person can take the key and unlock the door, whereas a dog or a raccoon can't do that. So the latch key is
Okay.
out for you.
Well, yeah. My reference to latchkey, of course, as a Gen Xer, is growing up, going home after school alone with my own key. They call this latchkey kids.
Yeah,
Yeah.
latchkey kids. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that's a little bit
Okay.
different, but it's
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
in the same vein.
Well, yeah. Well, thank you. That's always fun to learn new things like that.
Well, give my regards to your wife or your partner.
Yeah, I will.
And do come back whenever you feel like you have something to say. And we
Absolutely.
will let you go.
Thank you, Ellen. I appreciate it. And thank you to everybody who asked questions and who's listening along. That's wonderful. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah. All righty. So
Bye.
Darla is going to roll us out. There we go.